Sydney, Australia's best-known city, a place where success is on show. A couple of miles south of the famous Opera House and just up from where the first settlers landed, Darlinghurst Road will give you a taste of the other Australia. A part of town that shows just how far Australia has come. From violent penal colony to tolerant multicultural community. It was where Australia's first strip club opened and the setting for the violent birth of gay rights, and is now a refuge for modern-day outlaws. A trip down Darlinghurst Road is a journey into Australia's alter ego. Darlinghurst Road runs from Oxford Street in the south, passing through the 6-lane intersection with William Street, and on through the King's Cross area to the El Alamein Fountain in the north. Built to commemorate the Australians who died in World War II, and named after the famous battle in North Africa, this elegant fountain and its peaceful surroundings could lull you into a false sense of tranquility. The rest of Darlinghurst Road is far from tranquil. This busy intersection with William Street, where a 6-lane highway meets a 7-road junction, is the center of Darlinghurst Road, and all directions start from the huge Coca-Cola sign. Go north from the Coke sign and you're in King's Cross, a lively part of town with a mix of betting shops, bars, and bright lights. This is where people come for a taste of the wilder side of life. South of the Coke sign, and there's evidence of what Darlinghurst used to be like in a more genteel time. In the late 1700s, Darlinghurst Road was the place for rich settlers from Europe to build huge mansions. But Sydney's population was growing fast, and few immigrants had money, so lower-cost housing began to spring up, and cheap hotels, like the King's Cross Hotel, which still stands on its original site. At the southern end of Darlinghurst, there's a pleasant little park called Green Park, but the name has nothing to do with the color of the grass. In fact, it was named after Alexander Green, the local executioner who pursued his ruthless craft just opposite the park. What is now the Sydney Institute of Technology used to be Darlinghurst Jail, a building that reveals some dark secrets about the violent birth of modern Australia. In the 1820s, Australia was where the British sent its convicts, often very poor people who had been sent to the other side of the world for minor crimes like pickpocketing or petty theft. And the sentences were often severe. Once they arrived, they were set to work building their own jail. If you look closely at the walls of the Institute of Technology, you can see markings where the convicts signed the stones they'd carved to build the walls to imprison them for years to come. With a population largely made up of criminals, it's not surprising that the Australians were fascinated by the criminal mind. They believed that they could learn a lot from the faces of the worst offenders, and often made death masks from those they had hung. Once they had a plaster mask, they set about analyzing the criminal skull, applying the then popular science of phrenology. Scientists at the time believed that they could map the skull and identify which parts affected different sorts of behavior. One face that became the subject of particular scrutiny belonged to Australia's most wanted, the outlaw Ned Kelly. Kelly was best known for his homemade body armor and his distinctive iron mask. But when his luck ran out, they tried him, hung him, shaved off his beard, and made a death mask. Although dead, Kelly had plenty of enthusiastic imitators. And even as late as the early 1900s, the streets of Sydney were plagued by gangs of thugs called push gangs, recognizable by their neckties. They had an inventive eye for a nasty weapon for use on those who dared wander along Darlinghurst Road after dark. These days, it's a pretty safe stroll to another reminder of modern Australia's brutal origins. The Aboriginal Print Society celebrates art from Australia's original inhabitants. When the first settlers landed in Australia, they suppressed the native people and banned their religion and language, turning Aboriginals into social outcasts. In recent years, both sides have been trying to build bridges between the two communities. Gallery owner Michael Kershaw believes the artwork is part of this process.
Aboriginal artists see their art as a way of exposing non-Indigenous people to their culture. It's a way of helping the reconciliation process.
Some paintings recall the traditions that were once an Aboriginal way of life. Although the designs in these paintings may appear simple, in fact, the arrangements of dots and lines are often highly accurate descriptions of the local landscape, instantly recognizable to those who live there. Aboriginal paintings are now highly collectible and fetch thousands of dollars in fashionable galleries the world over. It's appropriate that the story of Australia's long journey to accepting and celebrating its original people should be found on Darlinghurst Road. It's always been ahead of the times in accepting what the traditional Australians have found hard to swallow. In the 1950s, the notorious artist Rosaline Norton,
in the name of the horned god,
was causing a huge scandal with her orgiastic rituals and paintings of demonic creatures. So she headed for Darlinghurst Road, where she had a little flat behind the King's Cross Hotel. It was said she had a powerful hold over some of the pillars of the establishment, who were rumored to visit her there. One of these was the man who, as head of the Australian National Orchestra, began the campaign to build Sydney's most famous landmark. But Eugene Goossens had no part in realizing his dream. His bizarre love life was exposed on a furtive trip to Rosaline's flat on Darlinghurst Road. You can see her work in a little gallery under the Coca-Cola sign.
am in this temple, within and without. Let there be no distractions and no interruptions.
Rosaline's eccentric artistic tradition lives on in the work of the sleeve master. The award-winning tattooist, a leader in his field. You can pick any design, but you've got to have the money up front.
That's it.
For the boys with something to prove, a visit to the sleeve master is a must.
Yeah, they come up here like when they're just turned 18. A lot of times they're scared. Don't know whether they can handle it or not, but they've usually got a heap of mates that have done it. When they leave, they got it, they're a lot more sure of themselves, you know? Because they've passed the test.
If you can take the pain, you can take home the ultimate souvenir of a trip up Darlinghurst. People have always come to Sydney's Darlinghurst Road for its nightlife. But one of the most popular places to grab a bite to eat is bound to remind you of when the Americans came to town. In the 1960s, American GIs were having a rough time of it in the jungles of Vietnam. But when they were offered a bit of rest and recreation, many of them were shipped down to Australia. It didn't take the GIs long to work out where the action was in Sydney, and they headed for Darlinghurst Road, got out of uniform, and left the war behind. Many friendly American restaurants and night spots sprang up to cater to the R&R boys. The Bourbon and Beefsteak was one of the most lavish. Michael Connoy remembers the young men who came to forget the jungle warfare.
They came here for 5 days. They had $1,000, let's say 1970, and that was a lot of money. And the girls knew about it. The girls were all ready for them, and they claimed them pretty quick. And they took them out to lunch, dinner, and supper. It was like coming into a mini New York. It was absolutely fabulous. We had good times all the time, and that's what they liked.
Most of the American night spots closed down when the war ended, but the Bourbon and Beefsteak survived and flourished, with the support of American presidents, no doubt grateful for its valuable contribution to the war effort. You might notice the Bourbon has no front door. It doesn't need one, because it never shuts. And there's a very special lady on the bill tonight. Carlotta used to be a man, but she changed sex in 1963 and has since turned into an Australian institution. The Transvestite floor show is well established in Australia, but it all began when Carlotta founded the Lake Girls Club on Darlinghurst Road and gathered together a group of the best transvestite performers around. From the word go, the show was a sensation, and it fit right in with the tolerant atmosphere. Somewhat surprisingly, their reputation spread far from the morally relaxed inner city, and the high camp outfit found themselves much in demand with bookings in outback mining towns. So Carlotta and the boys hit the road in a bus heading out across the desert. And if that story sounds familiar, they say the internationally famous film Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, is indeed based on Carlotta and her boys.
We weren't like Priscilla, we didn't have a pink bus. You know, we did it the hard way. We're in cars and trucks and it was a long haul.
Much to everyone's surprise, when they reached the outback, they got a great reception from the audience.
Well, when we went on the road, it was a different kettle of fish. I mean, a lot of the men wouldn't come along and see us. But then we started doing mining towns and they just adored us.
But looking gorgeous didn't necessarily please all of the audience.
Some of the women can be the worst in the audience. They're jealous because we look so good, and it really puts them off. I mean, we had some funny times, as you do, but then there were times where you were just screaming, you just wanted to get home.
And even though she's now 57 years old, Carlotta still knows how to pack 'em in.
Oh, I'm friggin' home! Oh, and what a better place to be home with the bourbon and beef!
Another well-known institution just off Darlinghurst Road is the Piccolo Coffee Bar, run by Vittorio Bianchi since 1950.
Well, don't forget that 51 years ago, things were quite different in those days. Actually, 51 years ago was much better than now.
An old-timer who has seen many famous faces come and go.
One night, this beautiful woman was outside the door, and when I saw her, my heart just went boom. And it was Liv Ullmann. Liv Ullmann, they were making a film with Jeremy Irons. Oh, she wanted to go to the toilet. She wanted to go. And I said, you don't want to go to the toilet. It's horrible. Anyway, she said, doesn't matter. I've been to India. That's okay. Nothing shoves me.
As impressed as he was by Liv, Vittorio didn't manage to recognize Mel Gibson.
He was here, so sitting right over there with some lady. And when he left, somebody said, did you know who that was? And I said, I think so, but I'm not too sure. Not too sure. Anyway, so that's Mel Gibson. But I didn't recognize him. was not recognized. I don't tell you why, because otherwise I might get sued. Yeah, what are you eating, dear?
If respectable Sydney doesn't like the look of you, chances are you'll still feel welcome on Darlinghurst Road. So it's where Sydney's answer to the Hells Angels tend to gather, to polish up the chrome and show off their horsepower. They're known as the King's Cross Bikers, and their leader goes by the nickname of Animal. He's a man with an interesting past. Animal's stepmother ran the notorious King's Cross Hotel. In those days, King's Cross was the hangout for rival gangs or crims.
That's King's Cross pub. That's where all the old crims used to hang out. You had the toe cutter gang, the razor gang, the King's Cross boys, all different gangs used to meet there.
The pub was regularly raided by the Vice Squad, but Animal's stepmom knew how to look after her boys' best interests.
So they go in the King's Cross pub, have their meetings, give mum their guns or whatever. She'd take them upstairs in a big bag. Then the Vice Squad would come in all of a sudden, take one or two blokes away, leave the rest alone. They got their catch for the night. Then she'd come back down with all the weapons and everything, hand them back to them, and they go back to their business again.
Animal learned a lot from the clientele and has since served time in most of Australia's toughest jails. But he's going straight now, and perhaps because of his life spent as an outsider, Animal understands and sympathizes with those who get washed up in King's Cross. He has his bikers go round the restaurants collecting leftover food, which he helps to distribute to the homeless on Darlinghurst Road.
These guys would have nothing. And they'll come to us before they go to anyone with a suit. But this so-called society reckons we're no good because we're bikers. But I don't see society coming up here doing this.
The food is distributed every evening from the charity's food van by Linda Stewart.
There's a lot of poverty here, but it's like a family. It's very close-knit. And there's always a shoulder, if you needed a shoulder, or someone to give you a hug, or someone to talk to.
Good boy.
And it's not just the humans that need a snack.
Even feed the pets. Something for Ned?
You got anything, love? Named him a good name, Ned Kelly. Mad dog. He's a crazy dog, this one.
Where do you get the plates from? Did you like the pasta?
Yeah.
Darlinghurst Road and the King's Cross area of Sydney has always attracted street performers with a relaxed attitude to the rat race.
Everything's exaggerated, misery and pain. Remember, someone's gonna lose or someone's gonna gain. You can't excuse the King's Cross basket blues. King's Cross blues. No one cares about the news. The King's Cross blues. No one cares about the news. Cause the joint still jumps, that's a fact you can't refuse.
It's also well known for a more risque kind of entertainment. A tradition started over 40 years ago by Sir Wayne.
Me and my friend Lashcard Louis, we opened the first strip club here in Darlinghurst Road.
The Pink Pussycats' reputation spread, and it became almost respectable as the stars dropped by and the police kept a close eye on what was, in those days, still considered illegal.
I remember one instance early when we started up how this woman of the police department came up and informed us that if any of the girls had G-strings that were less than an inch wide at their waist, they would be charged with indecent exposure.
After he sold the club and retired, Wayne revealed that most of his girls were actually men in the early stages of a sex change. Darlinghurst Road is full of surprises, and it was the original centre of Sydney's gay community. But Australia has taken a long time to recognise the rights of gays and lesbians, and some of the biggest battles were fought out on Darlinghurst Road. On June 24, 1978, around 1,000 gay men and women marched up Darlinghurst Road in protest over the illegal status they endured and the rough treatment they receive from police and authorities. What was to become the world-famous Mardi Gras started out as a good-natured protest. They made placards and chanted slogans demanding equal rights with heterosexuals. Ken Davis, who was on Darlinghurst Road that night, remembers the frightening events that followed.
In 1978, this was the point to which the first gay and lesbian Mardi Gras in Sydney got to before the police blocked off both ends of Darlinghurst Road and started mass arrests. The response to that by the people in the Mardi Gras and also by the people on the side of the road was to try and free the people who were arrested.
At the end of the night, 53 people had been arrested. And the next day, they were tried here at the Darlinghurst courthouse. Their outraged supporters came along as well, and once again took on the police, right up the courthouse steps. In the following months, there were more protests and more battles with the police.
Because of that extraordinary riot on Darlinghurst Road, the Mardi Gras since then has become an annual and very large event.
In 1984, homosexuality was at last legalized in Australia, and Mardi Gras has now grown into a major cultural event. Now, every January, nearly 700,000 people line the main streets of Sydney to watch the spectacular parade of 200 floats with 8,500 performers. The festival is a huge cash injection for Sydney, as it brings in almost $100 million in annual revenue to the city. What began as a minority movement on Darlinghurst Road is now a great day out for the rest of Sydney and the world. Sydney is now seen as one of the most progressive cities in the world. But Australia has not always been known for its tolerance. Things have certainly changed. And Darlinghurst Road, where they always welcome the outsider and care for those down on their luck, has been in the forefront of that change. Now, it's a great place to enjoy the difference.